Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Chasing Heroine on this day. So if you've been watching for a few episodes so far this season, you've seen that every other episode I'm doing something a little bit shorter that I'm also recording visually for YouTube. Coming out of last season, there were a lot of requests to have it be something that you guys could watch also. So every other week, shorter podcast, not so much a story, but typically something like a principle of recovery or something that's helped me that I will record for you visually, solo cast that I'll do alone. Ideally a little bit shorter. So far, I'm actually done pretty good. So far, I've kept them to about 20 minutes, which is super hard for me to do because left to my own devices, I will talk for like 2 hours. Okay, today I want to talk about a morning routine and having a morning routine in sobriety. I actually think having a morning routine is something that's beneficial for all people, not necessarily just addict, alcoholics in recovery, but I'm going to focus today on people in recovery and why I think it's such a great idea. So this was actually also the helpful tip suggested by Brad Jensen in our episode GTA and SLC. If you guys have not listened to his episode from season 1, I highly recommend it. And when we asked him for an actionable tip, he said a morning routine. So I wanted to share mine with you guys and then also talk a little bit about like why I think that's important. And one of the reasons I think it's super important, and I wish I had discovered it earlier too, I actually didn't start doing a morning routine until this year. So with COVID, I was just at my studio a lot by myself listening, and I got really deep into a variety of podcasts that were so helpful to me. And one of the podcasts I discovered, it's been out for a while, but I had never listened to it, is something called The Skinny Confidential. It's Lauren Everett's, Michael Bosstick. They're a married couple. They're entrepreneurs. It's kind of a lifestyle podcast, but they also talk a lot about like business and holistic health, and I've just gotten so much out of it. So if you guys haven't ever checked out The Skinny Confidential, I recommend them. But one of the things Lauren talks about a lot is a daily routine, and when she interviews guests, they always share theirs. And so I got into the habit of doing one at the studio because I also had time, and it's been, I wish I had started doing it earlier because it's been so amazingly helpful. And the more that I learned about it, the more I've understood why it's so helpful, and then why I think it's particularly helpful for addict alcoholics. So coming out of addiction, our lives were typically like so chaotic. I mean, you guys know that, I don't have to tell you. Like for me, waking up, finding a vein, assuming I have anything left, finding a vein, and then there's that immediate hustle. I gotta go get $20. I gotta get dope. I can't be sick. It's just a hustle. And even in the early days before I was doing like the really hard stuff, even when it was earlier on, it's still super chaotic. Even if you're not somebody that became a homeless heroin addict like I was, it was still super chaotic when I was drinking and binging 3 days out of every week to try to catch up. You know, I was always having to like lie to my boss or lie to friends, and just like, it's a constant grind of just cleaning up the mess from yesterday. And when we're spending all that time cleaning up the mess from yesterday, there's really no time to progress. So, and we're in that space when we're first in recovery. We're in that chaotic space. And I think a lot of people fall into, I don't want to call it a trap, but a mindset of, okay, once my life slows down, when this and this happens, when I get this job, when I get my car, when I get this, then I'll XYZ. Like, then I'll start taking care of myself. Then I'll start working out. Then I'll start cooking, you know, whatever it is. We're waiting for our life to become stable. And Amy Dresner actually shared this on another episode last year, and I thought it was so moving and poignant. She said, most people think that discipline comes from stability, meaning once my life is stable, then I'll get in shape or whatever. But actually, discipline leads to stability. So when we can start our morning routine early on, something like that requires some discipline, that's when the stability of life is going to happen. And it actually happens in reverse. And for addicts in particular, this is like a really hard concept to grasp and to embody because it was so chaotic, and our lives are typically particularly fractured. And so stability feels very far off. So when someone like me is suggesting to you to sit down and do breath work in the morning, it's like, why? I need to go try to find my driver's license, and all that stuff is true. But if we can start making ourselves somebody that begins the day with the discipline, that's how we start to pull the stability into our lives. And the other thing about doing this every day is the rehab that I went to multiple times. The owner of that rehab used to say that, and his morning routine was a little bit different, but he still advocated for one and said that if you do these things, your feet start walking in a slightly different direction. And for addicts, like that's enough in the beginning, right? Here's where we're headed on this chaotic path. And if every day we can just start with a little bit of discipline, get focused, get centered, we just start moving in a slightly different direction. And ultimately, that leads us to a life of, positive change and some structure and the ability to get the life that we know that we really want and deserve. Also, so how does this work? Our brains have something called a reticular activation system, or your RAS. And it's basically the filter through which we see the world. And you guys will kind of recognize this to be true. And if you want to learn a little bit more about this, I was actually just listening to a podcast. It's called Becoming Limitless or Become Limitless. And he does a deeper dive into the RAS. If you guys want to check that out, it's on like Spotify and Apple. I would tell you they're Becoming Limitless. And he's got one on the RAS and it's really good. It's a little bit deeper dive into the science of it. But basically it's like this, and you guys have probably seen evidence of this in your life. So say you're looking to buy a car and you really want a Prius. And you start seeing Priuses everywhere and realizing that, were they always there? Of course they were always there, but I didn't notice them before. But now that they're on my radar as important, my RAS is filtering them into my conscious because I told my brain that that's important, right? So now I'm starting to pay attention to that. Or if you're in a crowded room or like something that, someplace that's really loud and crowded and somebody calls your name, your RAS is what filters out the noise of everybody else and recognizes something important, which is your name. Now, I'll take that a step further. We decide what the RAS thinks is important through our belief systems. So if we believe our name to be important, which we do, right? That's what we pay attention to. That's our identity. The RAS goes, okay, that's important to you. I'm going to pick up on that. And it filters out anything that isn't necessarily what we've decided we need for survival or what would be important to us. So it also works in the opposite direction. So if we're someone that thinks, especially if you're someone like me that relapses a lot, your brain will filter out evidence to suggest the contrary. So your brain will filter out evidence that you don't relapse a lot, and it's only going to show you evidence that you do, because that's the belief system that you've been given yourself. And so as addicts, it's hard to change, but we can change it with like some specific action, which is why I want to share with you two things. So there are two ways that we can actually change the reticular activation system. We can start to change the negative filters that it's pulling in and start to prove those as not true. And then we also can start to program our brain to look for positive things. So I have 3 suggestions to help you start to filter out the negative about relapsing and drug use and this belief that I'm always going to be an addict. So your brain isn't constantly feeding you this like hopeless narrative that like, yeah, you are always relapsing. Everybody else around you can do it and you seem to not be doing it. And your brain will like make that case for you. We're wired for survival, and that hasn't really changed a lot. And so your brain doesn't know whether or not what you're asking for is good or bad. It just goes, that's what you want, got it. You relapse. We're going to look for information that supports that idea. But we can change that. And it's actually not, you have to put a little dedicated effort into it, but it can be changed. So these are the 3 things I think that you can do, because it's one thing for me to tell you all that stuff. It's another to give you actionable ways to get there. In this podcast, that's why I ask every guest at the end for an actionable tip that they've done. I don't just want this to be like theory and I say some motivating stuff, but as soon as you turn off your phone, you're back to, well, so what do I do now? Because I know what it's like to listen to something, feel really motivated, leave, and then it's like, okay, you lose that motivation sometimes. So what can you do that's actionable? Taking time and taking your 30 days, your 60 days, and your 90 days, taking your chip, standing up, acknowledging yourself for that, and like looking at that in your hand. And I don't know about you guys, but I never wanted to take 30 days or 60 days or 90 days because it felt so dumb. Like, oh, I didn't shoot heroin for 30 days. You're not supposed to shoot heroin ever. Like, how is this a real life achievement? That's how I felt. But it was a massive achievement. And in the beginning, we need to acknowledge those achievements even more so that we can continue progressing to the next stage. And I'm here to tell you guys at 6.5 years, it was harder to get 30 days than it was to get 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. I never think about dope anymore. I really don't. So it is actually a massive achievement. The first 30 days are more of an achievement than my 7 years. And I'm telling you that if you're in the early stages, getting to 30 days, getting to 60 days, because it's been your coping mechanism for years. It hasn't been my coping mechanism in a long time. I got married without drinking. I go to parties without drinking. Like, it is no longer part of my coping system. But if you're in early recovery, it is. So that's actually when you're doing the impressive work. So I encourage you guys, take your 30 days, take your 60 days, take your 90 days, take your 6 months, keep them somewhere where you can see them. Because when you see those, it starts to change your belief system that I am someone that always relapses into I am someone who's an active participant in recovery and who is making these achievements. And your RAS is going to go, okay, we're somebody that's in recovery. I'm going to start to filter in evidence that we are people in recovery. And so that's one clear way that you can start to change that idea and filter in what's coming in a little bit differently. And along with that, and this might be a little bit controversial, I don't think that every time we relapse, we should have to stand up and take another white token or newcomer token. And you're going to get sponsors that are going to maybe like make you do that. In my sponsorship tree, we don't make anybody do anything. It's a program very much of self-reliance. My sponsor, Rachel, she's also been a guest on the podcast, has never once given me an order or a directive ever. And that's kind of how I sponsor too. But I know that many sponsors will kind of tell you what to do. So if you have a sponsor that tells you to take a newcomer chip, listen to them, not me. They're the one that's in your life or whatever. But I don't know. Have you guys ever have you opened your bag or your purse and you just see white newcomer tokens, if you're an NA, like all over the bottom of the bag? It's such a crappy feeling. Or like open your glove box or wherever you have them, open a drawer and there's just white tokens everywhere because it's evidence of how many times I've tried. To me, that's evidence in the negative. And so I quit taking newcomer tokens at some point. I would take my 30, my 60, my 90, but I didn't keep standing up and taking those tokens. I felt stupid walking to the front of the room with everybody going, oh, what a surprise, Jeannine relapsed. For me, I couldn't take that anymore. So I wasn't actually gonna get into that. I'm more about taking your chips, but that's something to think about the white tokens. Like, do you want to keep, or whatever color they are in other fellowships? I'm forgetting right now what they look like in HA. I don't remember, but I know they're white in NA because that's where I took the most newcomer tokens. So take your time, look at them, put them somewhere you can see them. The second way that you can start to change the narrative in your brain, get a commitment at a meeting, even if it's really, really small, like taking the phone list or making coffee, or, it doesn't have to be the secretary of a meeting. Maybe you're just standing up and announcing who the sponsorship contact is, whatever it is. Because taking on a commitment at a meeting, if you start doing it, if you do it for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, you start resetting the idea in your brain that, like, I'm a piece of shit that no one can rely on. Because, again, I'll keep it me. When I first got clean, I'm getting emotional. When I was first trying to get sober, like, I really believed that I was a complete piece of shit that no one could rely on. And I remember my friend Steve at the sober living I lived at asked me to be the secretary of a meeting. And I had like 2 weeks and I had relapsed forever. I'd relapsed at that house multiple times and he had to kick me out. And he said, I want you to be the secretary at this meeting. And I remember looking at him and I was like, Steve, like, we both know I'm not going to stay, We both know I can't do this commitment. And he said, yeah, whatever, maybe you won't, but I want you to do it anyways. So I started doing that commitment and I didn't relapse. And I actually kept that commitment for 18 months, for longer than I needed to. I had moved out of the sober living and I continued to drive back there for another 6 months. And that was the first real evidence. I kept the little notebook. I didn't lose it. And that was evidence that I was someone that was succeeding in recovery. The stack of tokens, the notebook, you start looking at those things and going, man, like, look at me, like, I'm someone that can be in recovery. So now my brain is looking for evidence that I can be somebody that's in recovery. And then the third thing that you can start doing, and this is going to be annoying to hear, is start actually doing step work. Whatever your sponsor is telling you to do, start doing it. not even just for the lessons that, you know, like all of the other information that you get from doing step work, sure, but I know you've heard that from everywhere else. My take on it is also this: you finish step 1, you do your timeline, you finish step 2, whatever that is, you finish step 3. It's kind of crazy to start thinking like, okay, I'm someone like the old timers that have done the steps. Like, I've done steps. Look at me. Like, I'm actually doing step work. I remember after I got done with my step 6 for the first time, my sponsor at the time was like, look at you, you're halfway through. And I thought, look at me, I'm halfway through. I'm like a person that does step work. So I encourage you guys to do something like that in recovery that you can complete, finish, and start feeding your RAS a filter that is different from I'm a piece of shit who's gonna relapse, and into I am somebody in recovery who does the things that people suggest to me. And now I'm going to suggest to other people too. Like, look at me helping other people. You know, it's a totally different vibe than when we were using. Because the other thing is, and I want you guys to give yourself some slack in the beginning too, your RAS for a long time was looking for who's going to steal from me and who am I going to steal from. When we were in active addiction, we were wired for survival. And that might carry on into early sobriety. You may still feel that criminal mindset. You might still feel some of those things. But based on what I just told you, hopefully that makes more sense now. It's not because you weren't born to be someone that stole things. It's because in your recovery, in your addiction, you trained your brain to look for survival. Like if somebody leaves something sitting on a table, I'm gonna grab that, I'm gonna trade that. You know, you leave your dope out, I'll steal it, you know? And also I'm looking for the people that are gonna steal from me. So you come into recovery with some of these maladaptive tendencies. I don't even want to call them negative, but they're not helpful for progression into life. So cut yourself some slack, know that it's chemical, and know that it's something that we can actually alter. So that's how we filter out some of the negative things, doing those 3 things I just told you. Now, how can we start to filter in positive information? And then this is where my routine comes into play. And again, and I encourage you guys, if you want to find your own routine, whatever works for you. Like I said, I spent all year listening to other people talk about their routines, and I sort of took from it what worked for me. And this is what I do. So every morning I listen to a playlist that Gabby Bernstein put together. I think it's called Binaural, and it's supposed to like fire up both sides of your brain while you're listening to it, and so that they're communicating a little bit better. It's called Rage on the Page, and that I only recently found. Prior to that, I would just listen to like classical meditation music. So listening to something like that, I read that day's Just for Today and the NA book, and the Just for Today NA book. And then not only do I read it, I try to apply it to my own life. Like today, it was about your foundation being in recovery, and how does that apply to my life? So I'm doing this today, but I'm also doing an H&I tonight at my old sober living, or at my old rehab. And if I wasn't doing that and I read that, that would have been a reminder, like there's a new Saturday HA meeting that just opened up. Like my husband and I need to get back to that. So I read the Just for Today. It reminds me I'm in recovery. Sometimes gives me some tools for the day. And then I also answer 7 questions that I got from Tony Robbins. And the 7 questions, if you want to write them down, and they're present, they're from your day right then. And it's, what am I happy about today? What am I excited about today? What am I proud of? What am I committed to? What am I grateful for? What do I enjoy? Who do I love, and who loves me? And I'm gonna share with you guys how I remember it. The acronym that I remember it: Hep C, Gen Love. Hep C, Gen Love. Happy, excited, proud, committed, grateful, enjoy, love. That's how I remember it. And maybe that will help you guys remember it too. So like, for example, today, I'm happy about was, I'm really happy with, we just renovated our studio and I'm really happy with it. I'm happy with the renovation. I'm excited about my current playlist that I'm playing this week at the studio. I'm proud of the studio. I'm committed to rebuilding the studio. A lot of times it's about the studio or about the podcast. Grateful. Today I was really grateful for all of my staff is rock stars, but my girl Sam, she's like a rock star. She can do anything. Grateful for Sam. I'm enjoying my mix, and I love Skylar, and Skylar loves me. That's often at the top of my list. for my loved one. And when you start doing that every single day and answering those questions, your brain starts to learn, okay, she's going to ask me these questions tomorrow. So during the day, I need to start looking for things that are going to make me happy, excited, proud, etc. Does that make sense? So you start filtering in positive things when you make this a habit. And then the thing that I do after that is I do something called Wim Hof breathing, WIMHOF. This is another thing I got from the Skinny Confidential. And Wim Hof breath work, I would love to say that I'm somebody that meditates, because I know that's big in the program. But I don't know, like I've never been able to get there. Even like took the TM course and all that stuff, and I just find myself not committing to it. But what I can do is this Wim Hof breathing. It takes like 10 minutes. You inhale and exhale like really loud, really big. You can look him up on YouTube. I go to his Instagram and just go right through the link in his bio, and it takes me to the YouTube, and they've got like lungs increasing, and he walks you through it. And he's got this cool accent. So then I do Wim Hof breathing, and Wim Hof breathing, something that puts strain on your body in a controlled environment, helps teach us how to manage stress. And if you want to learn a little bit more about that, another guy that I love is Andrew Huberman. He's a neuroscientist from Stanford, and he has a new podcast out, and he talks a lot about ways to put stress on your body in controlled environments so that you learn to manage stress as you move through the world. Kind of sets you up a little bit more for success. And obviously as addicts, we have zero coping skill. I don't want to say zero, not a lot of coping skills to manage stress, because we were just shooting dope or whatever it was that you were doing, drinking, whatever. So learning other ways to manage is just going to set you guys up for success. So that's it. That's the whole shebang. That's what I do for my morning routine. That's why I think it's important. And again, guys, I want to reiterate, your belief that you're somebody that can't get sober is gonna get in there. So start celebrating the ways that you're sober, start celebrating the ways that other people are. That's one of the reasons why I talk about this. I look to my life for the evidence. I was not somebody that anybody thought was gonna live through any of this. Going to meetings is gonna help you see other people's life as the evidence that it's possible, and hopefully slowly start kind of getting in there, and you can start believing in yourself too. So morning routine, always I'm open to suggestions through Instagram, through TikTok. You can email me, chasingheroine@gmail.com. And thank you guys so much for watching.